by the way, Haddad, you've been doing a lot of good work for the venture fund, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's super exciting, the work, and so I'm very happy to be part of it.
Yeah, no, you've been doing a great job reaching out to the investors and putting it all together. And Sonny, I've been trying to, I was telling Alessandro, it's time to kind of pull you back in. So hopefully this will be the start of kind of letting you know where we're at and what we're doing.
Cool. Yeah, since we're on the whole coronavirus thing, I'm not even in my house. I'm actually sitting at a project that we just finished, like a 4-unit. So I'm just chilling there because there's no way this call would be possible if I was in my house. My son would show up like every 2 minutes, like, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" You know? Yeah. So.
And we are live. So welcome to everyone that is watching us live. Of course, this also is going to be recorded and available after we end this meeting. So I'm Alessandro Marianantoni. I'm founder director at Accelerator, and today I'm facilitating a conversation among friends and about diversity and startup investment. I'm saying friends because we're almost all friends. We know each other since pre-COVID, I would say. So I would like to start right away and introduce our panelists, our outstanding panelists, and so they have a chance and opportunity to say what they're working on, from training to business development to investment. And so let me start with introducing Noble Drakoln, CEO of Drakoln Capital. Noble, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. My name is Noble Drakoln, and I really appreciate being a part of this, Alessandro. Like you said, we've known each other pre-COVID for the last couple of years. What we do is we help people in the pre-seed, seed, and Series A round, or pre-Series A round, obtain capital. So we use a method called the 506C in order to put them in touch with accredited investors. As an offshoot of that, we have a podcast called the Accredited Investor Journal podcast, and we also have a digital magazine called the Accredited Investor Journal, in which we do our best to intersect both investors and founders and innovators to help them raise capital. We also actually work with Accelerator directly on a venture fund to support the founders and students that come through the various cohorts through Accelerator. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Noble. Orie Ward, Program Director, our Globalize.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Orie Ward. I'm very happy to be here and honored to be on such a panel of amazing rock stars. Hopefully I can carry my weight today. But again, I'm the acting Senior Program Director and a board member of Globalize Entrepreneurs. And Globalize Entrepreneurs is an LA-based accelerator program that provides male entrepreneurs of color with skills, infrastructure, a network, and access to capital. We have a 10-month intensive fellowship program where we train entrepreneurs on how to develop their business acumen, how to build competitive business models, how to actualize revenue and attract investment.
Thank you, Orie. And I would like to introduce David DeJesus, partner, VU Venture Partners.
Thanks, Alessandro. Good to be here, guys. Good to meet everybody. I think just off the bat, I've been a mentor to Accelerator, mostly teaching the no-code barrier, introducing the world to no-code tools and no-code opportunities, and not having to have a technical co-founder any longer in the future, realizing that myself as a software engineer for the last 10 years, there's a big gap in knowledge, and that gap of knowledge can be solved now with some big no-code tools. On the side as well, I'm an angel investor and venture partner with VU Venture Partners, and VU stands for Venture University. So it's also an accelerator fellowship for those people who want to get into the asset class. So the asset class itself is really teaching both people right out of college and also those with kind of long-standing careers like myself, about the asset class and how to navigate it, how to invest in companies, how to leverage other people's money to invest in companies. And so I currently have a couple things going on. I'm a founder of Peerable. So Peerable is my peer mentor platform that I'm building currently at the moment, essentially to help just the same way founders kind of extrapolate all the different things that they need to navigate while understanding venture capital, and then connecting them with people who have already done it. And then I'm also founder of Action Ventures, which is my new venture journey into building a venture fund, as well as supporting early stage companies. I think we all kind of have the same goals here in terms of who we are and where we come from. I think there's a lot of diversity, and that's some of the challenges I've had also growing up into this startup space. Not really the ones making the decision, but as an engineer, always being the one being told what to do and not really having a decision in the startup process. So it's been great. And I think, running into Alessandro downtown LA, it's kind of my home. It's a home base for me. So it's pretty refreshing to see. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, David. And Sunny Singh, Vice President at Tech Coast Angels.
Hey, Alessandro. First of all, thank you for having me on the panel. And it's an honor to be here, especially because this topic is very relevant. Tech Coast Angels, where I'm vice president, is an organization which a lot of people are familiar with. It's one of the oldest and largest angel groups in the country. Unfortunately, it's one of those groups which was majority led by a bunch of old white men, excuse me for saying so, but things have changed drastically. As you can see, I'm vice president there now, and we have quite a few people in a leadership position. So I'm leading the charge there for more diversity in the group, and I'm hopeful becoming president one day and to have even more sweeping changes in the organization. Venture capital and angel investing in general have, as everyone knows, very little diversity. And so it's an honor to be on this panel, and I look forward to everyone's thoughts. Specifically, TCA is committed to making sure that we can educate angel investors as much as we can in the ecosystem and support them, and also support the early stage ecosystem in Los Angeles. And Alessandro, you're doing a fantastic job in that regard. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sunny, for the kind words. I'd like also to introduce Hanad Musa. We work together at Accelerator. Hanad is a project manager. Hanad, would you like to say a few intro words?
Yeah, hi. I'm also very honored to be part of this panel. I work with Sunny Noble now as well. Graduated from UCLA last year, right before COVID. And yeah, just kind of, dipping my feet in this ecosystem, and I'm really loving everything that I see and that I've been doing. And of course, it comes with its own set of difficulties, but yeah, I think we definitely talk about that, and I'm really excited to hear everybody's perspectives today.
Thank you, Hanad. So as I said, I will try to facilitate at my best this very important for everybody topic. I mean, the relationship between these two words, or meanings, the diversity and startup investments. I like to start with saying that recently a lot has been in my mind, of course, from George Floyd to the protests to how educate, especially, this lockdown situation gave us a lot of time, right, to realize what's happening and what is still happening. In my case, a lot of my thoughts, of course, goes also to my how to raise my daughter here in the U.S., how to educate her, And in fact, I mean, I even brought her to a protest just because I thought it was a very educative thing to do. And I remember also a long time ago, I mean, I wrote an essay for a UNESCO conference. I was very young, I was 16, and it was the right to be different and the right to be equal. At that time, of course, I was thinking about Europe. And nowadays, I'm thinking a lot about how to integrate those ideas in what I do. And in some cases, if I'm integrating it well. So my question for all of you, that we can start, you can freely take the mic. I mean, my question for all of you is, what has been in your mind lately? Noble, would you like, who wants to take David?
I can kind of just give a little bit of, so I was doing a little bit of thinking before this call, and I think one of the things that stands out to me is pretty interesting, because as we speak about, you know, D&I, diversity, inclusion, we're definitely seeing, you know, some virtue signaling from very, very big corporations, which people are responding to, and it becomes kind of a challenge in people's own hearts to really, you know, come to terms with what they're saying versus what they're doing. But I think one positive note that I just want to put out there, and because I'm currently speaking to LPs, institutional endowments, and otherwise, we're currently raising $100 million for the VU Venture Partner Fund. I've spoken to some awesome LPs, and there's only a few that I've spoken to, but their mandates have been pretty clear. The mandates that they state is, you know, at the capital level, they're looking for more diverse, you know, fund managers, and thus then supporting, you know, diversity. But I think the challenge, you know, for them is they're just not seeing it in their purview, and it's not that they're actively seeking it out, because of the asset class is so selective in the first place. You know, the first places that they're going to look are, you know, the historically Black colleges, the classic kind of Ivy League schools with different, you know, Black engineer groups. And so they're actively looking. And now that we're actually seeing, you know, a few funds being announced, it's the efforts that they've been putting in for the last 18 months that actually show that these funds have now closed. So Brian Brackeen, I think they just announced a couple other ones that they're just not on the top of my head, but these LPs have been you know, pushing mandates pretty hard for the last few years, and it's not just now. And I think the interesting thing too is when you read the textbooks, like the venture capital textbooks, they say it pretty clearly that it is a problem. It's stated pretty apparent, and a lot of the HBS grads have been kind of forced to change in the last 20 years, kind of due to the professors changing guard. You know, so we have some awesome things happening. I'm pretty optimistic about what's going on.
Sounds great. Anybody else wants to follow up on?
No, yeah, I think David has some solid points that, you know, this is kind of trajectory. We saw that Goldman Sachs, even prior to all this, began to mandate diversity on boards, and they were looking, you know, they said if there's no women on the board, if there's no diversity on boards, they weren't going to invest. And this is prior to, like, you know, immediately prior to all this happening. But at the same token, I also believe that there's an ecosystem that is always hyper cultivated in when they make a decision to go after this sector. And, you know, David made it clear. He said, like, they're looking at HSBC, they're looking at engineering groups, and there's still a stratosphere of an ecosystem that exists prior to their aggressive trying to go to just what W.E.B. Du Bois called the talented 10%. There's a whole other swath of innovators and creators that are not necessarily deep inside institutions, even though they're highly institutional focused, that also need to have a broader swath of incorporation, right? And you have a program like Orie's, which is taking, regular standard everyday entrepreneurs that are going through an intensive that may have never been an HSBC, may have never gone to an Ivy League, who are just as validated and just as capable. And so that's kind of the mix, right? That when you have these aggressive changes, the drive and push is to immediately go to what is assumed to be diversitydom, right? That this diversity means that you go to what was a historically black college to now find your swath of people, while there's a whole group and a huge ecosystem of diversity that just may not be there. And so I think that we always have to be careful in large institutions trying to find quick fixes for things that are not necessarily quickly fixed. And it's always this push to, or this knee-jerk reaction that, well, we have these people from these black colleges, or we have these people who are deserving. There's nothing to negate, but there's still other programs of support. I think PayPal put out had a diversity grant not too long ago, which they're giving away $10,000 to small businesses, and I think the total is 100 million. And I think the whole program filled up within less than 24 hours. By the time it was announced, everyone had already gotten their allocation, and that's kind of that rubber stamp. Now PayPal probably feels like we've done our part. So it's one of those things where you always have to look at the ecosystem and be very careful that this doesn't just become part of this news cycle and then just gets cycled out because of fatigue. And that's what happens, right? We have the Me Too movement, which was a legitimate movement, has legitimate concerns, and people got fatigued. How many of those situations were going to continue to happen that people are going to kind of give the same emotional and psychological energy to? And so the concern is, even in this instance, when you have Amazon and Walmart now banning sports teams because they have the derogatory terms, Redskins, for Native Americans, when do you find that there's a distraction from the true conversation of inclusion and not an overall kind of literally diversity washing? You go from whitewash to diversity wash, and that's kind of my feeling on how things are now. It's very unsettling, and how aggressive people are being, as if they're going to just have a silver bullet.
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quick. No, well, that's actually a great point. I think as capital trickles down, right? I think my specific storyline was that LPs, so big institutions, endowments, they're looking for fund managers. I guess especially being a fund manager at this point, you definitely have to have some type. I think pedigree is like the 15% criteria, but I think there's like other criteria there that is required of you to be considered a good fund manager. And I think colleges are kind of the go-to, but I think that that money also then goes out to founders from all different areas. That's a good point. I mean, I just want to kind of add that note to my anecdote.
I agree with you. I do believe there's a trickle-down effect, but that's kind of how America always gets into the problem that we have now, the constant belief that there's a trickle-down effect, right? That was Reaganomics.
And I would add, both the cultural and political, social, well, all the dimensions of it, it boils down to a supply and demand issue, where you have maybe in a good year, 18 to 20% of the people who graduate from college with a bachelor's degree African American, and that's just one minority, maybe 13% for Latinos. Okay, you end up, to Noble's point about the talented 10th, have a very limited supply of people with the pedigree, to David's point, to meet your standards. And that's one side of the equation. So one side of the equation, organizations like ours have to continue to increase the availability of competitive, capable talent, people with high potential who may not have had access to a lot of the bridges that others of privilege have, creating more availability, more access. On the other side of the equation, and this is the layer that, systemically we have to dismantle is the prejudice that exists because you don't have this pedigree or you don't check off these Victorian, standards that you are not capable, that you are not competent. And it's a really simple thing. I mean, we've all been in these positions where just the time it takes to find talent, just the headache of like going through and, okay, giving people a shot, and then they don't deliver, and then it sets you back. And I mean, to be honest with you, for a lot of people, it just boils down to something that's impractical. But I think that's where that pipeline matters. Where no, there are very capable entrepreneurs of color. They're very capable people with skills, where that number is continuing to grow. Let's plug you into the right sources. And let's also reform some of your expectations, because innovation is happening everywhere. It needs to happen everywhere. It can't just be based on this dated set of criteria, because we're missing jewels and we're missing gems. And what we're seeing is that the people who we underestimate are delivering. And they're outpacing institutional organizations, institutional Fortune 500 companies, and a lot of growth verticals. And so I think that's a part of what we're trying to manage as we're building this ecosystem, making sure we got where we're building up the people who are high potential, who just need a push, and also that we're reforming culture so that people don't stymie themselves because of prejudice and outright racism.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things to that. From my experience, I don't think a lot of these older institutions are the institutions that are going to be leading the charge. They're very incremental in their approach. So they'll put a few percent here, a few percent there, and they'll say that I think we need new institutions that are built from the ground up to be inclusive, rather than trying to fix a system that's broken by putting, like the analogy I use, it's like putting a Band-Aid on cancer, It's just not going to work. I mean, we need to stop looking at the Harvard Business Schools and the Goldman Sachs of this world, because they're just built on these weird elitist criteria that just like excluding people and not including them. And, we just need new institutions with a new sort of thinking, new sort of way of getting people involved. And these old institutions are not going to be the ones to lead that charge. At least I don't believe so.
And just to add to Sonny's point, I mean, unfortunately, I wish it was just, racism. It's not. It's systemic. They're old institutions in which almost anyone is almost impossible to penetrate, regardless of ethnicity, to be honest. It just happens that it's worse even when it comes down to ethnicity being a factor. But if you're not the right person for the right school, whether you're a woman or Caucasian, these things play a factor. You weren't part of the country club, you didn't attend the right, and so these, and mind you, that's part of the tribalism issue that we deal with in this really small circle that we're all part of too. That Accelerator has a tribe, that's why we're all here. Then you've got David Zeus, and he's got his tribe of people, and then you have Orie. We all have our tribes, but Sonny, he started off talking about how he became the VP of Tech Coast Angels, which is its own internal tribe. And the tribalism component of it is that first layer of barrier to break through, to just say we're open to, and then you can start breaking down the prejudices. So I think it's all part of in this particular ecosystem, all part of a place where everyone's holding the golden goose, right? That's going to lay the egg. They're all trying to make sure that however they allocate the funds, it's done just right, even though they still have a 90% failure rate. So it's to their benefit to open up to diversity, but at the same time, there's a lot of fear on a lot of verticals.
Yeah. I still think the selectivity is still, that's selectivity is a criteria that you have to use to talk to investors and LPs. And it's a strategic thing, but selectivity doesn't necessarily, if you're talking to me, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm selective about, a social, cultural, or racial component. That's never a criteria for me. I think the criteria comes down to, just like Orie was saying, like the business acumen, the strategic, prowess of a person. And that doesn't necessarily come from an HBS grad. Strategic prowess comes from, like in our partner meetings, we constantly talk about, does this founder have grandmaster capability and grandmaster chess, like a grandmaster in chess? And so the criteria that we really look at there are, can this person look at their landscape, make all the right moves in the next 5 years, and have them all somewhat already thought about ahead of time, and then use this money to enhance where they are in that strategy, and they already have it planned out. And I think one great story, and it's just kind of an anecdote, I'll just add it in there, but being part of Venture University, our GPs have been doing venture capital for a long time. And one thing that they're very proud of, especially for Venture University, is that our diversity and inclusion rates are super high. I mean, I have some awesome people in this team. They allowed me in. I don't even have I don't have a traditional degree by any means. And so in order to really understand this asset class, there's a combination of, of hustle, business strategy, tactical strategy, and you don't need anything. You don't need a degree to tell you any of that. You just need a little bit of experience in working with people. And so I just wanted to add that in there. I think some of these institutions that we're talking about, there's obviously those notions of, I wrote a tweet yesterday, which is one of the key things to startup key successes to startups in kind of the modern world, in modern technology world, is that, it doesn't matter how hard you work. Actually, it just it just matters how many degrees you are away from wealth. Because if you're 1 degree away, you can ask an uncle. If you're 2 degrees away, you can ask a friend's uncle. If you're 6 degrees away, then you have a little bit of harder time, but all you need to do is navigate the landscape to get closer degrees. And I think there's also some misconception about wealth, because right now, I think even those who are wealthy are having a hard time allocating because of the value of the dollar, right? So we're looking for reinflatable assets, and the best asset class right now to invest in is private equity, right? And this is what we're all talking about. So people are looking for opportunities. They're looking for things to allocate their money to, because if they just keep it in cash, or if they keep it, in any other currency, they're going to lose that value in the next 6 months. I'll say it. So as we create selectivity in our thesis about investing, those entrepreneurs also need to know that that's all you need to do is hit the right notes. It's like writing a pop song. It's a formula. It's like there's a presentation. This is the problem, formula.
But David, this is where I have to interject.
Sure.
This is where the conversation of selectivity and the false meritocracy falls in. So I get 100% that there's notes that you have to hit, and some people are more than capable and plausible in hitting them. But that's when underlying factors, and while venture fund is probably an outlier in the situation where you do have the venture university has a high ability to be inclusive, it's oftentimes that selectivity in which people are doing those right notes, and then the idea that if you just do all the right things, you're in, and you're still excluded.
Oh, there's no pattern matching. Yeah, it's not pattern matching. It's just there's notes. There's notes.
Yeah, I know. But my whole point is that there's that secret, that there's always that extra in behind the scenes that you're like, okay, we did all the quote unquote notes. The person seemed like they were a grandmaster, but that's why we're talking about systemic. But they were so far removed from the 6 degrees that last note didn't help. Right, that the idea that because they were 6 degrees separated and they didn't have the uncle or the friend's uncle, then all of a sudden they were not able to get the capital they needed.
And to your point, Noble, I mean, for me, as I've been studying this in so many different ways, from federal levels to all the way to local levels, one of the challenges of just minority communities, we just have a volume issue. We're expecting 10% to carry 90%. It's just not possible. But also to your point, David, I know you probably want to move on, Alessandro, but I just wanted to chime in and say that I am a proponent of teaching people how to hack the system. Let's teach people how to hack the system, create those surface cracks. Meanwhile, those who have found their way and there's some representation, lean in on the business case, on the practicality. We know, I'll give you an example, Chick-fil-A in their hiring process. When they're evaluating people who they want to be a franchise owner, and even on certain levels of employee, they use what's called an adversity quotient. Because they found that people who go through adversity tend to have more grit, more innovativeness, and just more drive than a person of privilege who's like, you know what, this is just too much, I can't. They won't stick through the hard times because they just don't have practical experience doing anything hard. And so I think we know that these communities that have gone through adversity can deliver and deliver exponentially when put match for match. But I think, you know, a part of what we have to do is acknowledge, not just theoretically and philosophically, but very practically, what we're trying to do is reprogram human nature. When you spoke about tribalism, Noble, like the reality is you're not going to get any of these groups to undermine their own need for self-preservation. You're just not. You have to make it appealing to them to do something different. You have to allure, there has to be an allure, something that causes them to trade and exchange with you. And I think that's a part of the strategy that sometimes gets underwritten or undermentioned, because we get real progressive and say the whole world should change and this is the way it's supposed to be, but practically that won't happen in this century. So I'm a very much of a proponent of teaching people how to eat. If we got to deal with incrementalism, fine, let's crank it open until we get it open. Where we can get big wins. But I think we definitely need a range of approach here.
Ori, why don't you give 2 minutes and explain what Globalize is? I mean, I think everybody else pretty much explained their own companies. I mean, would you, since you didn't have this opportunity yet?
Yeah, sure. So the whole thesis behind Globalize, and I've been a board member at Globalize for about 2 years. And before that, I worked in management consulting for 12 years, and I worked on the Hill and worked in government and commissioner for cities and things like that. And, the thesis behind Globalize is that if you could take a talented, ambitious, smart entrepreneur, and person, when I say entrepreneur, a person with an entrepreneurial spirit, not necessarily all the points on the board yet. You give them the training, the infrastructure, the network, and the access to capital. And in that process, you build them against competitive, high-performing standards. How far could they really go? How successful could they be? How much could they actually penetrate the entrepreneurial ecosystem? And so what we did was a lot of research, but from the 10,000 Businesses Initiative to Goldman Sachs, research that the Kauffman Foundation has been doing, and their 3 M's about, better management, more access to capital, better access to markets. And we designed this 10-month intensive that focuses on 3 outcomes. The first outcome is we want male entrepreneurs of color to have the foundation to build a competitive business where they're actualizing revenue and attracting investment. There are points on the board, it's profitable. There's not a whole lot of debate about whether or not it's performing, because it is. The second outcome that we pursue is we want them to have better business acumen, but also better emotional intelligence and mental health. A lot of the things that we don't talk about and a lot of accelerators and incubators don't touch on is the tremendous amount of stress and mental anguish that goes into being an entrepreneur, let alone if you're an entrepreneur of color and you quit your job and now you have 3 kids and you don't know, and you have a team of 4 people, and the stress that really caused and how that disrupts other mental illnesses that were underlying in the surface. So that's one of the components of our program that we really like to focus on. And then the third outcome that we focus on is just community collaboration and peer-to-peer development with people of color and their allies. You got to feel like you have support. in order for it to be sustainable, because all of us know how grueling it is. It's thankless work. It's sun up, sun down. It's I haven't slept, I'm on coffee and whatever else, because if I don't get it done, it doesn't get done. And I think that a part of what allows that to become sustainable and by extension more accessible to people is that we actually have to help them do it. We have a culture of hazing people into entrepreneurship. It's you should just figure it out. But this is also coming from people of privilege who can go and ask for $1 million because their grandparent or their aunt has it. And so a part of what Globalize seeks to do is to equip male entrepreneurs of color. And we focus on male entrepreneurs of color because we think that, one, being male entrepreneurs of color and just being males of color, period, we see female entrepreneurs, their ecosystem is going off, from Black Girls Code to all of the Black Girls Rock, the initiatives, the better gender, they're showing up. And they are helping each other and they're banding together. Meanwhile, we have this very almost egomaniacal approach to get in the room with each other, and we got our chest puffed out, and we don't know how to be vulnerable with each other. We don't know how to ask for help with each other. And so that for us, we found to be something that's mission critical for the entire community. And so we have a 10-month intensive program. We are actually opening, our applications are actually open right now until July the 30th. You can go to www.globalizeleaders.org to apply. It's a very small, very nominal rate for everything that you get. You're learning from HR directors at Fortune 500 companies, professors at MBA programs, successful entrepreneurs. You get executive coaching. You're a part of a peer mentoring circle. It all leads up to an amazing pitch competition where we will have a community of investors, from angels to banks to VCs, who are not just there to find investment opportunities, but also to let you know, hey, I like what you guys are doing. This is what else you can do to make yourself more competitive. So more like a consultation. That's the program. We're really excited about it. We're about 3 years old. We've had other small programs leading up to this. And so if you guys are interested, feel free to hit us up.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Orie. Is it too early to say that we'll be collaborating?
No, it's not. I was going to save it. I was going to save it for you. We definitely are excited to work with Accelerator during our Discovery Weekend in the first week of September. We're going to be talking about the entrepreneurial mindset, design thinking. How do you really, when we talk about access to markets, how do you create authentic demand? How do you design a responsive and lean business model so that you can achieve that and find the right product market fit and iterate? And so it's going to be an amazing and exciting collaboration with Accelerator that we're very, very happy to have.
Yeah, we're also excited to collaborate with you, Orie, and Gamal, and all the entrepreneurs that are part of your cohorts.
It's really cool, and I love what Orie's doing, because it takes there's accountability and personal responsibility, but it just has to intersect with the changing climate, and it's an opportunity, I think, right now for a lot of people to just find that moment to kind of shine while it's available, right? Strike while the iron's hot, and it's on people's mind, and to create those outlier opportunities over the next 5 years. Because as entrepreneurs, that's kind of how we think. We think in 5-year and 10-year increments of where things are headed, and how do you be a part of that overall system. So it's awesome. I love what you're doing, Alessandro. I've spoken on it in the past. So
sounds great. While you guys were talking, lots of points to my mind. Something that I was interested is we never made it clear that we made it clear on our website we're open to diverse ethnicities, or we're open to we are with the Black community. But somehow our messages, the way we've been approaching the founders specifically, somehow what we were saying resonated with them. Resonated with Orie, I guess. That's how we met. That's why we met. but resonated with also all the founders that are being applying also even recently more than ever. But probably definitely our approach being multicultural is definitely helping us in promoting ourselves in the right way. We're definitely open to internationals. You guys all know that we have a great deal of we have a great deal of international participants, and probably our different accents and and countries of provenance are helping into presenting ourselves as a very multicultural accelerator group. I would like to make another round. I mean, so we've been talking about, some of you have been talking about some policies. Do you actually think that policies, implementing policies in the institutions will help the current situation? You've been talking about Ivy League institutions, campuses. We all know, I don't want to make it too complex, but we all know that also a lot of in the education is changing. You may know that spending a lot of years in the academia from inside and now from the outside, I really realized that the situation in the education, especially in the US, is really, really changing with a lot of those, let's say, smaller, private, cheaper schools that are delivering great software developers or boosting skills throughout the several fields and the several industries. What do you think about running in your companies, your funds? I mean, is it the right solution, implementing policies to be sure that we're opening up to everybody?
I think, can I just add?
Sure, sure.
I think what Orie is doing is a great way. You know, I think there's some kind of built-in structures that are breaking down, but these are very much impressions of our mind, because I'm sure that if you meet someone, you know, a Black or Latin person that's graduated from HBS, you'll be best friends. But you know, it happens to be that there's very much, you know, some impressions that we kind of keep in our heads. I think what Orie's doing is an awesome piece to this, because it's you know, it's creating the funnel, and what's happening, or at least the art and science behind venture capital is it's so selective. Our goal is to return, you know, 20 to 30x on an investment, not for ourselves, but for someone else who's putting the money in. And so you realize that a big part of this ecosystem is to really include those people of wealth in the conversation, and they're the most quiet at this point. But you know, in each and every group or vertical or category, that ecosystem drives, you know, new ventures. Kind of like if you go to San Francisco, I think a lot of groups, you know, a lot of angel investors pay it forward very much for new entrepreneurs into the space. I think LA has its own kind of investment culture, because LA is movie and media based. So you can still sell a movie on a napkin and get, you know, a couple million of production budget. So what I'm also referring to is that, you know, specifically in the Black community, there's a lot of celebrity, there's a lot of, you know, wealthier groups, and it's a matter of kind of teaching, you know, and educating even the wealthier groups to realize, like, you know, venture capital is a great asset class. It's a great investment. There's a high risk. It's the highest risk, but participate, because it's paying it forward to the new, you know, generations of entrepreneurs playing in the space. Because I think an interesting example is I went to a college prep high school, and a lot of the kids I went to school with were, you know, they all turned out to be professional athlete families. But that the professional athlete world is kind of the same ecosystem, where it's like you're nurturing at a young age, you know, the sport, and you're dedicating the commitment to that sport, and you're saying, hey, dad is a professional sport, my grandfather was a professional athlete. It just kind of creates this ecosystem, and I feel that's, you know, that could be very much replicated in entrepreneurship, and that's kind of the way I see it now with you know, the big contracts, the $1 billion companies, I know that those are kind of outliers, but there's this beautiful kind of set area that you can get in with wonderful, you know, entrepreneurs pushing awesome products that change the world. And venture capital is really responsible for all of that, especially the technology that we're using today. So, you know, venture capital as the asset class in itself is responsible for a lot of the world impacts that we're using. So getting into there and really understanding that landscape is interesting, but then also having all those touch points, like from this entire ecosystem. And it's a flywheel. It's not a top down thing. It's a flywheel. It's like, I really do believe that, you know, hurting investors is just as hard as hurting entrepreneurs. So
yeah, that one I can concur with. I've been doing it for 26 years, and that's why we got a huge database now of a few 100,000 accredited investors that we've been accumulating, and that's why we started creating the platform and the digital magazine. And it's really important to, I think, even in our media, and that's why I decided to do the podcasts and do the digital magazine. Even our media, we have to also expose investors to the opportunity that these founders even exist. Part of the problem oftentimes is not necessarily, explicit bias. It's implicit because you don't even have exposure. If you don't have exposure and you don't know, the founder, I use Calendly every day. The founder of Calendly is African American, is Black. You know, the founder of Needle in the Haystack, which is coming out, and I had him on my podcast a few days ago. Just is finishing up his round on WeFunder, I believe, and African American. But the thing is, people, when you don't have exposure and you don't know what you don't know, then it also adds to the selectiveness as well. So yeah. It's a mixture of, and this just goes back to why it's systemic, right? You know, if it's not worthy of spotlighting, or people don't know to spotlight it, or it's kind of overlooked, then you don't get it out. And so that's why, these kind of conversations and why things are happening the way they are now are good, because we get a chance to say, hey, look, it's selective, it's tough for everyone. But now here's an opportunity to kind of let people know who you are and what you're about. And so, that makes it all the better. This is everybody, by the way. our default, seventh panelist.
That's great. We have a question from Michele on our social media on Facebook. It says, it is difficult to sell and innovate in a culture where innovation is accepted only if it's imposed by the public administration through a law. Without individual freedom, innovation is not creative, evolutionary. Anybody wants to comment on that?
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
Yes, I could take that. I agree 100% with the sentiment, but we live in a very, very non-idealistic world. So true freedom is a good ideal, but without getting too philosophical, without the correct policies, the systemic changes that we want will never happen. So we need to have balanced policy and public administration with innovation. And that's where that balance is the biggest challenge. How much policy should we have in place to make sure that, we don't completely turn into the law of the jungle where, the biggest fish eats the small fish in the pond. And that's not what we want to, we don't want to live in that kind of society. At the same time, we don't want to stifle innovation completely. So there's a balancing act there. Agree with the sentiment, but not always possible in it's not an ideal world.
Thank you, Sonny.
I would also say, from a policy standpoint, and I really love this lane, because I really believe that policy can create some of those systemic changes that we want to see. I think the first point is oftentimes we look at innovation as something that's very abstract versus it being a sort of almost a pro forma behavior or a mentality. You know, how can we do things better versus how can we cut costs? And not that they aren't, you know, not that they're mutually exclusive, but oftentimes we don't look for new ways to do things because we assume they cost more money or because they require more work. And we don't have a mindset that, no, we just want the best. And if that means we do more work, then we do more work. And so I think that a part of making a quote unquote institutionalizing innovation is having people who have the chutzpah and the drive to do more work if more work means we get a better outcome. Specifically though, you know, in some of the sessions that I'm having like this, and some of the discussions, I'm leaning toward 3, I think, key policy tenets or principles that I think would help in this discussion and help with the ecosystem. The first thing is, I think that we want to you got to create a diamond in the rough strategy. And diamond in the rough, of course, is lack of a better term. But it's effectively, that means you have to make a commitment and an investment to dig up the hard to find cases, to invest in the hard to find cases, the people who are unlikely but have the big wow factor. You know, oftentimes, you know, investors are already, they have that mindset. We just need to push them a little more and open up new vistas for them to sort of do that. So finding those diamond in the rough, prioritizing it is where you're able to go say, hey, here's an unlikely candidate that we wouldn't pick because of these standards or criteria, but they have these X factors that I really think that we should consider. Making that a framework or part of the framework or approach for any organization, institution, I find gets them in the right mindset, gets them opening new vistas. The second thing is, and I'm gonna try not to be too technical about this, but we have to adjust our investments we have to adjust our investments for a better return on equity. And when we have the equity conversation, inherently what we're talking about is Alessandro and Sunny and Hanad. We want them to reach the same destination, but they didn't all start at the same point. And so what we're going to have to do is probably give Hanad a little bit more than we give Sunny, given certain factors, so that they can start on an equal playing field and reach a certain point, or let them start from the same point, but infuse very relatively the resources that they need so that they're keeping pace. Okay, let them keep the same pace. And so a part of what we have to do is create structures and create formulas so that we are getting a good return on equity across all of our verticals. And we're enforcing that. And we're investing where we see underperforming verticals because we went into it knowing that they didn't all start at the same place, but we want them to reach the same destination. And then the third and final policy tenet that I'm really leaning in on is we have to advance our metrics from, I know inclusion is a big word right now, but we have to advance our metrics from inclusion to belonging. And that's something I learned at Aspen Institute. Like, inclusion at this point has come to me, you know, we included you on the email, but we didn't really care about your opinion. Okay, where belonging is, now I'm measuring how much did you feel you were actually a part of the conversation, that you made a contribution, that you were valued, and that you belong there. And I think if we can begin to shift how we evaluate our own performance in sort of this halfway attempt, then I think we start actualizing some results that you know, both sides are happy with. Sorry.
I mean, it's interesting, your point of view, especially the way you are putting in the conversation inclusion. I mean, because that remind me why I more often pick the word multicultural instead of diversity, because multicultural, it's already a word, a definition that includes inclusion. So that's our angle. That's how we see it. And I of course I agree with the support and reconnecting to what you were saying before, That's in a way what we do when we are evaluating founders for their intrinsic value. When we are evaluating companies, startups for their intrinsic value. I'm not even looking at the gender, the name. I'm looking at the deck. I'm looking at what have they done in terms of personal skills or capability of achieving results. And anybody else wants to add on that?
No, the only thing I could add is, I think, I'm on both sides of the fence in the sense that I'm on the venture side and on the fund side as well. And I think you have to be very, very cautious with this idea that somehow the funds themselves and even the investors are even really capable of knowing exactly how to kind of create the algorithm that makes that work. To David's point, you have to be really, really clear that they fail even internally, regardless of ethnicity, in who they should be allocating more capital to. I've been involved in multiple funds in which the one company that we thought, there's a whole phrase, right? The ones you think will, won't, the ones you think won't, will. And so you invest and throw money at the project in which it all seems like everything is the stars aligned, and you keep dumping money into it only to realize that it's just not the right project to continue to reinvest. And that's not an ethnic issue. And so it becomes very hard algorithmically to institute a lot of different policies that people ideally would like. I think that for me, when it comes down to a policy discussion, I'd almost, and I love Orie's breakdown, but I'd almost be in the point of inversion in the sense that at the very beginning, let's begin with inclusion. Let people know that there is an opportunity that they can be a part of this ecosystem and that there are places in which they are welcome when they felt they weren't welcome. Listen, I love to eat. I'm a big foodie. Growing up, I had no idea that you could be a professional chef. Everyone loves my cooking. I make food all the time. I do all kind of stuff, right? But it was never part of my ecosystem sphere that, to go to Cordon Bleu and maybe become a chef. And it just was never something that psychologically, fit with my idea of what a career that generates money. I was put into, 3 boxes, right? My family's in the medical field. Even my son is going on to be, is studying to be a doctor. So either medical field, lawyer, and I didn't like blood, and I didn't want to, burn my eyes out reading case studies. So then I went into finance. So it's one of those things that the first part is just the awareness that people are welcome. And that's one of the things that I've always been appreciative of how Accelerator makes its mandate from day one with the concept of multiculturalism. I love that Orie is making that a mandate to say that Black males are welcome in this space, that they are not only welcome, but they are deserving to be here, and we're going to give you the tools to compete. So I think that when it gets to that second gray area, we have to not look at these institutions and these investment groups as if they magically know everything and they're going to be able to say Sonny gets this amount, Hanad gets this amount, and Alessandro gets this amount. They don't. There's no way that they. I've been trading for 26 years. If that was that simple, I would have put all the money every time on all the best stuff that even looked bad. It's not that simple in the sense that that's a policy that they can institute. But to just, like I said, so that's a tough one. I think it makes sense. But then more importantly, when you, so the final part of that is then you get back to the first assessment to say, would they be willing to take a risk on this person? And I think that as venture capitalists, we're all trying to take a risk on the idea, but we know that it's really the team that matters. And I think that if we invert it and say the inclusion begins first, and then will we take a risk on this person, just let them be in the room. We just are oftentimes not at the pitch fest. We're not at the, I've attended tons of them from across the country. It is a small number of people who are women or person of color. And I know you're saying that, the women have band together in a big way, but they still find a hard place to even just show up on these pitch fests. It becomes a very everyone needs to feel like they belong, and that's really the core of it. And I think then from there, interaction, just like when people went to university and when, busing started for kids. I'm a product of busing when I was a kid. Just by being there, people are forced to realize, to eliminate the fear and then begin to develop the trust. Investors are a very, very cautious lot. We don't trust easily. We don't want to trust easily. And at the same time, those people who do gain our confidence and gain our trust, we support 100%. So it's that ability so that's why I say conclusion is always the best place for me personally, I think, policy-wise. Just make the outreach. And then the second part of that really is the mentorship. Make the outreach and don't say it's not good without giving a solution for the problem. That if you're going to allow the outreach to happen and you're going to allow people to be and you're going to be inclusive, then give them the guidance to do better. To say, you know what, you missed the mark by XYZ. The reason why this doesn't work is because, as David said, you missed these 3 points that we kind of like to see, but I'm going to show you how to get those points. I'm going to send you out there. I'm not going to leave you by yourself to sort it out, because you may not, you're 6 degrees separated from each one of those points, right? It's not even just capital. You're 6 degrees separated from the knowledge to even occur to get that idea or that point. So I think that the inclusion and then the mentorship makes all the difference. And then everyone who has the grit will figure it out. I started off homeless. I had nothing. I had a backpack when I was 17. I left home, and because I had a mentor who brought me into the financial industry and let me be his assistant, I was able to get my license as a broker when I was 19. But that mentorship was key in order for me to even realize that this was a reality, that this is a world that I could be in and be a part of, and then the guidance at every step, all the different mentors that I bumped into. So I think that the reality is that the inclusion, to know that it exists and you're welcome, and then the ability to just give people guidance, those two things change the whole ecosystem.
What about a last round of comments, perhaps on follow up to Noble's? It's already an hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time. But the conversation, of course, it's really interesting. That's why it went through very quickly. But what about a comment from last comment from everyone?
Okay, can I go first?
Sure, Anat.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. One thing that I really liked from what Orie said was, talking about belonging. And, I think that the first spurt of initiatives was, about diversity. And now, we talk about inclusion. And I do think that belonging is, where we should be headed. I think because of the challenges of, it being a systemic issue that make it difficult, at the very base, like right from the start, like it's hard to get to that point. And I don't think that the changes that we want to see are going to be done in my lifetime, right? Like we always talk about, oh, it's 2020 and this is still happening. And I see people from the older crowd like talking about things from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And so I've kind of accepted that I probably won't be able to see the change that I want to see in my lifetime, maybe my kid's lifetime or something like that. But I think that the work that everybody's doing here is very important. And in the verticals that we're in, like there's a lot of impact that we can do. And as Sunny was saying earlier, like it's a lot of it's going to really come from policy and just building new institutions, because a lot of the changes are going to come from old institutions. They're
Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, I'd add to that, Alessandro, both to Hannah and Noble's point, that it's extremely important, I feel, that we should share not just capital. Capital is limited. It's very selective, but we can share knowledge. We can share guidance. We can share mentorship. I think that's a lot more valuable than the money that's shared. A person's mindset and the ability to know what's possible and what's not and how to avoid pitfalls is probably way more important than all the money in the world, which is why all these people with money want to give entrepreneurs the money, because they're the ones who have the knowledge and the ability to execute. I think that's what needs to be That inner circle needs to become a little more inclusive beyond all the money and everything else. Because what I'm seeing at the policy level right now is start a new program, give them some more funding, make sure that all the money is trickling. That's their measurement metric. What about the knowledge? What about all the other stuff that people keep close to their chest and never let it go? I think that's key. If a change has to happen on a systemic level, that education and that knowledge in the business community needs to be shared. And that's what's going to make the future generations a lot more successful, because you're helping people fish rather than giving them a fish, and that's super important. I completely believe that what Accelerator is doing with their knowledge program, that's what's needed. We need to give more and more people the ability to raise capital rather than trying to hand them the capital, because capital is limited. But we can definitely share other stuff.
Thank you, Sunny. I definitely believe in that, and that's all our passion into training. And I've said that many times. Basically, what it will be just enough to motivate. Basically, just motivated when we see the changes in our participants, the confidence that they gain over the 2 or 3 months of our program. So sometimes that it's just enough to motivate all the work that we do with them. And thanks again, Sunny, for bringing that up. Who wants to go? David?
I guess closing thoughts. Yeah, no, I've actually been very inspired by the chat today, and it was great to kind of hear perspectives. Thanks, Sunny, for kind of chiming in there. You're right. I think there's a big component to that. Capital, I would say that it is selective, but I think it's abundant. So it's like we actually have a significant abundance of it, and it's with certain people. But the wonderful thing is, once we're able to share this knowledge, and I think the internet has definitely done a great job at doing this, and I'm just reflecting on my own kind of different mentorship journeys, Noble, and I'm like, yeah, I even in my own peer group, I feel like the sad thing is I feel like I'm an outlier in my own peer group, and that's not a good thing. Like I want to feel as though I want to bring those people with me to enjoy my successes and to enjoy my wins. But that's just it. There's a big knowledge barrier and a big kind of acceptance to learn barrier within even my own peer groups. And so it's just it's a lot of reflecting today, but it was good. I was happy to hear everyone's perspectives.
Thank you, David. And Orie?
Sure. I too have enjoyed this conversation today. I feel like we could just riff all day, and I can't wait for COVID to be over so that we all can go out and just have a mashup. Because I'm sure collectively, what this has shown me today is that one, organizations like Globalize, myself, we're not alone. There are people who are waking up. There are people who are getting it. And so I guess my final thoughts is really, for the people who are watching this, being an entrepreneur, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do outside of probably being a parent. And in a way, it's like being a parent. And I just want to say that there is hope. I want to say that there are people who are really good and who can help you get to where you want to go. Sometimes you won't always feel like people believe in you in the way that you feel they should. You may have a hard time getting people to hear you or understand you. Keep at it. Keep at it. And keep driving and keep believing that what you're doing matters and that it's important. And you will find the people. You will find an Alessandro, you'll find a Sunny, you'll find a Noble, you'll find a David, you'll find an Orie. It may take you some years even, but you will find it. And you will, and your success doesn't have to be this multi-billion-dollar buyout. In some instances, you find with $250,000 a year because you probably won't make that working for anybody else. And then you'll scale up, and then it'll be a lifestyle. and then your children will see the options that they have, and your family will see the options that they have, and it becomes a very practical solution for life. And so I just wanted to encourage you guys, and thanks for tuning in with us.
I just want to say two things real quick. I had a child when I was really young. I had him when I was 18. So the funny thing is, like, when they say it's hard, the two hard things I had to tell my parents in my life were, hey, mom and dad, I'm having a baby at 18. Hey, mom and dad, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. The two hardest things I had to tell them in my life. So, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Noble, would you like to close it since last comment also for you?
Yeah, no, yes, you may have these spots. You know.
Oh, maybe.
So I think that the first thing that I would ever say is that always work to be the best version of yourself, and I think that will help you bring out the best versions in others. I believe that people really are inherently good. I don't think that people are really out to get you in any form or fashion. Yes, there's prejudice, yes, there's bias, but that doesn't change people being good. I think that the reality is when you come with a certain attitude of already negativity, you can't any way possible find a positivity in a situation. In a little bit, baby. Hold on. So the idea is that, you know, we're sitting here with a whole bunch of really great people who are exuding positivity, pushing for optimism. And, you know, I had to tell someone the other day, I said, being an entrepreneur has required that I always see the glass half full. I cannot ever take a day off to think that the glass is half empty. I have to think that we're one step closer to raising, one step closer to figuring out the next algorithm, one step closer to understanding our problem solution set better, and look internally for the solution, because externally there is no answer, right? The fish stinks from the head down is always the phrase. And so being the leader, I have to be the one to come up with the solution. And it's great when you have a collective who can share in that solution, but at the same time, you still have to hold yourself personally accountable. You are the one who has to file the forms and go visit Orie. You are the one who has to go to the 10 months of training. You are the one who has to ask David for help. You know, it's funny when you talk about your peer groups, you know, you and I are in a very similar situation when we talk about that, David, in which we wish that they would step up to at least ask for the mentorship, because we know nobody really wants unsolicited advice. So it's one of those things where it's always an intersection of those people who want it, but the difference between those who want it is just one little thing, and that's action. And the action has to be taken to drive forward. Orie, when he created his program, he put a litany, he put a list of things, Goldman Sachs, studies, etc. That takes time, energy, and effort. It is not something that magically says, I'm going to start a program. It's based on deep analysis to make the decision of a curriculum that incorporates emotions, feelings, in addition to, you know, in addition to the actual practicality of the work. So I believe that, you know, anyone who's listening, paying attention, you have to work towards the center, that you can't expect, and I hope no one ever expects, that there's going to be this conference or this redistribution of wealth that happens without doing two things. First, activity, you doing something, and the second, without appealing to people's own self-interest. It's 100% with them every day, all day. What's in it for me? If it makes sense to invest in your business because it's generating capital, and that capital shows that it can scale up to $1 billion company, the funds will follow. The only conversation I always have is just let us be in the room to show that we're capable of doing it. Let us be in the room to be mentored to do it, and then not kind of take the ideas to then reapply it to someone else to do it instead of us, right? So in that instance, I believe that the rest of it can work itself out, but you have to be the catalyst of your own change while everything is changing around you, and then be incorporated in that. So while Hanad said it may not happen in our lifetime, I never thought I'd ever see a black president ever. You know, it already occurred, and it happened 2 terms and was widely accepted among everyone. So I believe that the optimism requires that we believe that it not only can happen in our lifetime, but it's required to happen in our lifetime. And we have to be those who are the agents of that change. And whether it's changing and creating new systems like Sunny talked about, or working from within, it all, I think, happens in a convergence, its own singularity. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Noble. And just to closing, so I'm using the metaphor that Noble mentioned about that room. So we're keeping our doors open to everyone. Everyone is welcome. And that's why all of these outstanding panelists today joined us in this hour. So I really thank you everyone for listening on the live stream, everyone that will be rewatching the video on our social media channels. I thank all the panelists with me today, and thanks again, and just come and knock to our door. They are open.
Awesome. Take a
Thank
picture.
you.
Thanks, guys.